Well, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for continuing to watch this series. This is number 5 in our leadership series. I know last week the last one we did, number 4, was about 10 minutes long. I'm going to try and keep them back down to 5 to 6 minutes if I can. Maybe a little bit shorter at times. But we're almost to the end. So last week we talked about some questions to ask about yourself. And I know sometimes it's hard to ask those questions and be honest with yourself, but hopefully you took them to heart and you did ask those hard questions and maybe came up with some more. So with that in mind, I want you to know that, all great leaders have been tested, and we should expect to be tested, and we should want it. There's 2 great leaders that I can think of off the top of my head that went through tests. One would be Abraham when God tested him, and that's talked about in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. The second would be Jesus when he was tested in the desert, which is talked about in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Read those so you can see kind of the tests that they went through, and they're both great leaders. And there's many more. So with that said, let's start with testing our leadership. So the first thing we can look at is, do we compromise when we're confronted with a task? You may be able to set aside a couple of principles to accomplish a task or to reach an agreement in doing that task. But if you're lowering your standard, that's always taking a step backwards. An example of that would be when I worked in law enforcement and I was running a shift, I had a set of written standards. So at the beginning of any shift cycle or bid cycle, I would have all my crew come in, read those standards, and sign it so that they knew what my standards were. Now, my standards were a little high. They were sometimes a little bit tough to achieve at first. But that didn't mean that I lowered my standard to help that individual. What it meant was I put the extra time into that individual to bring them up to that standard. So it was a challenge on my part to make sure everyone was up at that standard. So that's non-compromising there. That's just setting that standard out there and developing your team to where you can grow. Second, do you have a strong desire to do or achieve a goal or a task? This is called ambition. It requires determination and hard work. But I want to caution you, don't promote yourself as being powerful or important when you're doing these things. An example would be putting in a little extra effort to better yourself without bragging. It's like you go out and we're talking about leadership here. You go out and you purchase your own leadership book on some new concepts, or you've got a new video you want to watch with new concepts. You read it, but you don't go back and say, oh, I'm so much better now because I did this, this, and this. Take it, put it into your toolbox, and grow from it and mentor others without bragging about it. Third, do you take an impossible task and stick to it? Or do you take the impossible task and do it? Or do you stick to the easy ones? If you continue to challenge yourself, you're going to grow. Which means if you take those impossible tasks or those difficult tasks and you work through them, you're going to grow. You're going to make yourself a stronger leader, a better leader. People are going to more gravitate to you because you're more rounded and you're willing to take on those things. But if you stick to the simple, easy, mundane, day-to-day tasks, you're just going to become stagnant. You're never going to grow, and you're not going to instill that drive in those who follow you. Fourth, how do you handle failure? Remember, no one's perfect, and we can't be right all the time. I know I make mistakes. I still make mistakes, and even though I'm not working, I make mistakes in my private life. But failure reminds us that we still need help, and it also humbles us. I, for one, can say that through my military career and my law enforcement career and some of the other jobs that I had prior to any of that in the restaurant industry when I was managing a restaurant, was a humble leader was always more pleasant to work for than someone who was arrogant or cocky. Just because they wanted to do more and help more people without getting the kudos for themselves. Lastly, Do you envy someone or something else? Or does someone envy you? And if so, how do you handle it if they envy you? You know, envy or also jealousy, both the same, it'll break apart a team. It'll break apart a unit. It'll break apart an organization. You cannot allow envy or jealousy within an organization or within your team, because it's just going to put a rift in there that you just can't overcome. So in my experience, and what I would suggest would be, if you have another one that envies your team, another supervisor that envies your team, figure out the guidance on how to guide them and build them up so they're equal too. And by all means, don't be jealous of them. If they're doing something that you're jealous of, then figure out what your shortcoming is to where you can build up to their level, to what you want to be like. So I hope this was helpful so far. Challenge yourself. Look forward to the tests. And God bless, hugs, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a good one.